Attention all Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn radio listeners. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast brings you the best in East Coast esoterica on the first of every month. Together, we can keep it growing by sharing the show on social media, subscribing to the show wherever you may be listening to it from, and by leaving feedback about your favorite episodes. John certainly needs a friend like you to help make his dreams come true, minus the alien abduction dreams. That is not cool at all. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Always available, always free, always odd.
It's the Odd to Newfoundland. Ghostly greetings from your host, Jonathan. Mysteries, ghosts, monsters and lore. East Coast esoterica and so much more. If it's odd to your friend, it's on the Odd to Newfoundland.
Ghostly greetings from the oldest city in North America. I'm your host, John Mallard, bringing you the best in East Coast esoterica. You, my friends, have stumbled upon the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast for the month of February 2019. I can't believe we're already a month deep into 2019, and it feels like forever since I had a chance to chat with you guys and gals. And, you know, I'd be remiss if I never took the opportunity to remind you that you guys are all wonderful. A masterpiece, beautifully made, important to people because you're important to me, highly favored by your creator, whether that is a god or by the laws of averages and physics working in tandem. You're thirsty for knowledge and addicted to wonder. You, my friend, are an oddball. And here on this show, you are family and we are one. Welcome to episode 67 of the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast, your monthly paranormal variety show. Thank you so much for taking the time to download this show. If you already haven't subscribed to the show, liked or commented on maybe a post you saw this on Facebook or wherever, please feel free to do so because, you know, it's not like you're getting me anything for my birthday anyway. I mean, you might as well, right? I mean, come on. Yeah, that's right. Here's something I don't seldom mention on my show, and it's kind of embarrassing, I guess, in a little way, but yours truly, John Mallard, is a Valentine's baby. Yes, that's right. I was born on February 14th. And, you know what? I can't think of a better way for you guys to celebrate my birthday with me this year. Look where you're to right now on your phone. Just take a little scroll down and find the follow button. Find the subscribe button. Find the comment button. Find the like button. Just throw me a little something there. You want to know why? Because it's my birthday. Be nice of you. Also, it really helps me keep this show growing, and growing it is. We have now just taken the 7th spot on Podbean last month, which means that I'm the 7th most listened to paranormal podcast on Podbean. And that is just an incredible honor already because there's shows that's been there for literally twice as long as mine has. And I'm starting to gear up and get closer and closer. So, guys, keep it coming. Keep sharing the show. Keep doing what you do. And I'll keep doing what I do. And like I mentioned before, it feels like forever since I had a chance to talk with you guys. And one of the main reasons being, of course, is that on the last episode, I actually had a little replay of some of my older episodes, 3 of my guests, the 3 most listened to guests last year, actually. And, you know, those 3 guests were amazing. It was so great to hear their voices again. And because Betty and Laura had just these amazing 2 little mini episodes, Laura had an awesome thing, like just really, really cool Dr.Laura's Lair. And then Betty had like a New Year's, almost like a resolution type meditation. It was so cool. I was like, you know what? I'm going to put 3 episodes out. So there you go. January 1st, I actually dropped 3 episodes of the show, and they were all 3 of them were very well received. Guys, I appreciate you guys just taking the time to share those shows. Thank you so very, very much. In fact, I seen that one of the shows actually got 117 shares, which means that 117 people either shared this once, or one person like really went all out and shared it 117 times. So thank you to everybody who shared the last show. But we will trudge on, for this is the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast, your monthly paranormal variety show. We've got to keep it going. And February is always, well, it's kind of freaking cold, to be honest. Right, too. So, you know, lots of old romantic stuff going on when it comes to Valentine's Day. But here in Newfoundland, we're, you know, got no choice but to snuggle up to our significant other because we'll literally freeze our asses off if we don't. But I will say this, I think February is a really important month, and it's more important for me and my family, and I'm going to tell you why. I actually just got word a little while ago that my dad is finally out of hospital. Yeah, in the last 2 months, Dad actually went back in, and now he's out again. So, how's this for a story? You guys have been listening to this show now for, almost 5 years, right? And I've always talked about my dad, you know, hopefully someday finishing up his chemotherapy treatment, stuff like that. Well, according to the doctors, it's looking like he's only got one more old treatment left to go. And, yeah, this is going to be the last one for Dad, and he's going to be able to ring the bell. Where he's to, and he gets his last treatment, they actually have a bell, you get to go up and ring it. And, you know, Dad's been having chemotherapy now since 2009. And, it's just such a great thing to see that happen. I'm so happy for him. And, what can I say? All your thoughts and your prayers over the last few years, they must have really done the trick, because guess what? If all goes according to plan and Dad beats Hodgkin's, he's going to be chemotherapy free, at least for now. I don't think they're going to put him on anything else for his other cancer. So that in itself is a miracle. And, you know, Dad's a very generous guy. I'm the same way. And, you know, when it comes to financial stuff and things like that, you know, there's always that stress after Christmas we all got. And I know this is a little bit off topic with Dad, but I always think of Dad and his generosity and stuff. And, you know, something he's always kind of shared with me in the small stuff in the grand scheme of things might not sound like a big deal to many people, but it's a big deal to me. One of the things he always said is money's like fertilizers. It's not much good unless it's spread around. So there you go. Here's some advice from me. If you want to be needy, hoard your stuff. If you want to be poor, you know, grasp whatever you can grab. But if you want to be rich, you got to give. Give. And there'll be no shortage of giving right now, because it's time for us to get into the paranormal news.
Somewhere between the funnies and the obituaries is, oh yes, the paranormal news.
According to a report, excessive drug use in London may be having an adverse effect on some of the local wildlife. The research, which was conducted by scientists at King's College London, found that a substantial amount of cocaine had been entering the river and overflowing wastewater from the sewers. Levels of the drug, which is entering the water through urine, are abnormally high for a major city. While London does not have water purification facilities to treat the water that enters the river, it doesn't account for times when major rainfall overwhelms the system, causing some to bypass it. Increases in caffeine, cocaine, and benzalkazine, which is a metabolite of cocaine, were observed 24 hours after sewer overflow events, the researchers wrote. To make matters worse, it is believed that the drug is likely to be having a negative effect on some of the local marine life. Eels, in particular, may be becoming hyperactive due to cocaine exposure. Drugs which affect us will almost always affect animal life, and invertebrates are a little bit more, their biochemistry is a little bit more sensitive to that, said marine life expert James Robson. Essentially, everything in the water will be affected by drugs like these. A lot of the triggers and ways that cocaine affects the system is really primal. So you know what I did? I decided to do a little bit of field research, and I reached out to actually one of the eels from the river. And, yeah, I actually got a chance to talk with them, so I knocked on his door and, I recorded this quick little interview with them. You want to take a listen? Sure you do.
You want to play with us? Okay. Say hello to my little friend.
Needless to say, he didn't want me to say much more else after that. Valentine's Day is coming up, and, you know, for a lot of women out there, they're pretty much done with men. And for a lot of men out there, they're pretty much done with men. Hey, man, it's 2019. I gotta be inclusive. Well, this one's about a lady. A woman in China, actually, who's made headlines recently after it emerged that she was unable to hear men's voices. So let's just think about that for a second. It selectively is unable to hear men's voices. According to reports, the woman who's been identified as Miss Chen had awoken one morning to find that she was suddenly no longer able to hear a single word that her boyfriend said to her. Like, are you sure you never prayed for that the night before? Concerned by the strangely selective hearing loss, she went straight to Quanpu Hospital, where she consulted Dr. Lin Kozong, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. She was able to hear me when I spoke to her, but when a young male patient walked in, she couldn't hear him at all, Dr. Lin told reporters. Chen had experienced nausea and ringing in her ears the night before the hearing loss had started, and was also under a lot of stress due to a lot of late working hours and a lack of sleep. She was eventually diagnosed with reverse slope hearing loss, which is a rare condition that actually prevents a person from being able to hear low-frequency noises. Fortunately to Chen, however, the condition is only believed to be temporary. So, no point in getting divorced just yet. I just think of all the fights I'm in. Imagine if my wife couldn't hear what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure that'd be like one of Steph's dreams come true, actually. If you stub your foot, you might go, "Owie!" But be careful, you might come face to face with a yowie. A delivery truck driver has been struggling to cope after coming face to face with a strange creature in the bush. The 50-year-old, who identifies as Gary, had been driving across parts of Australia's Gold Coast when he was suddenly forced to slam on his brakes to avoid a large bipedal creature that had suddenly emerged from the side of the road in broad daylight. He stopped and stared in horror as the 3-meter-tall creature slammed its eyes down on the bonnet of the truck before disappearing back into the trees almost as quickly as it had appeared. "It was the worst thing that has ever happened to me," he said. "I tried to push it into the back of my head, and I think that was freaky. I just can't do it. It's real. It was there in front of me. I just couldn't get a control of my mind. I was having trouble sleeping at night because of this." Known as the yowie, the creature is believed to be Australia's answer to North America's Bigfoot. The whole thing lasted for 5 seconds, and as you're staring this monster in the face, watching it, make sure it isn't going to step around you and at you. "You're scared for your life," said Gary. Sadly, however, he was unable to get a picture of the creature. "I figured it's a 1 in a million thing. Lightning doesn't strike twice," he said. "On the other hand, I'd like to see it with a camera just to prove it." Interesting stuff. The whole Bigfoot thing is just really, really strange. And there's been actually some really interesting Bigfoot stories going around Facebook recently. And, this kind of segues from the last story of the trucker. But I'm sure you guys have probably heard about that young boy, who actually got lost in the woods and apparently was looked after by a bear. But, there's one problem with that. Bears kind of eat boys. So unless he's hanging out with Winnie the Pooh, he's a lost boy and he's in the woods, right? A young boy who was found after 2 days alone in the wilderness maintains that he was looked after by a bear. When 3-year-old Casey Hathaway disappeared while playing outside his grandmother's house in North Carolina on Tuesday afternoon, efforts by local authorities to locate him began in earnest. He was eventually found after 2 days of heavy rain and freezing temperatures by a neighbor who had been out walking her dog when she heard him crying in some nearby bushes. In a peculiar twist, however, when asked about what had happened to him, he explained that he had managed to survive out in the wilds because a bear had looked after him. While there was no way to corroborate his remarkable claim, it's not the first time a bear has been attributed with helping to save a young child lost in the wilderness. In 1888, the New York Times reported that a 2-year-old girl who had gone missing in Valley later claimed that she had slept next to a bear to keep warm at night. A similar report from 1955 also mentions a 2-year-old who claimed to have cuddled up to a bear to keep warm after becoming lost in Montana. Whether this is any truth to these claims, however, remains unclear and a complete and total mystery. Guys, we got eels that are high on cocaine. We have a woman who's developed a really strange disease that might come in handy this Valentine's Day because she can't hear men anymore. A delivery truck driver who's been struggling to cope with some post-Yeti, stuff going on here. He actually saw a Bigfoot and now he just can't sleep. And a lost boy who says a bear, or could it have been a Bigfoot, was looking after him at night. All these stories have been odd, to Newfoundland.
And welcome to Dr. Laura's lair. Power on. Uh-oh. I'll get the broom.
Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex.
Did you know that life is sexually transmitted? Nothing turns me on more than 2 legs and a functioning heart without the use of electricity. Hey, master, every day is hump day when you already have a hump.
Baby, let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex.
Happy Valentine's Day. Let's talk about sex, baby. We know many of you will be getting some. So how do you stay safe when we're playing around? Well, I mean, Igor's probably not. Really? I don't think so. I have included a lot of information from the Centre for Disease Control, CDC, or the Public Health Agency of Canada, or PHAC, which is readily available to the general public. Google away. If you have questions, be sure to ask. There's so much information available. It is so important to educate yourself and all your partners. Remember, this is for your information. We don't know everything. You really need to speak to your own healthcare professional if you do have some sort of medical concern. We are pretty cool and all, but podcasts can't diagnose something with anyone. What are sexually transmitted infections, or STIs? Well, they're diseases that are passed from one person to another through sexual contact. These include things like chlamydia, gonorrhea, herpes, human papillomavirus or HPV, syphilis, and HIV. Many of these STIs do not show symptoms for a long time. So even without symptoms, they can be really harmful and still be passed on during sex. So today we're going to go through some info and some facts about chlamydia and gonorrhea. Remember, this isn't a textbook. We're not going to cover everything, so we'll just talk about a few things. So chlamydia is a very common sexually transmitted disease. It's caused by infection with Chlamydia trachomatis. It causes inflammation of the cervix, urethra, and rectum. Chlamydial infections in women could lead to serious consequences. This includes pelvic inflammatory disease, tubal infertility, ectopic pregnancies, and chronic pelvic pain. In 2015, a total of 116,000 cases of chlamydia were reported in Canada. Keep in mind, this is lab-reported cases, so that's only the people that are getting tested. There's quite a few people that aren't getting tested and don't know that they have these sort of infections. Females accounted for the majority, or 2/3, of all the infections from 2010 to 2015. However, rates among males rose faster during this time period. Youth and young adults had the highest rates in 2015. While increased rates were observed over time for most age groups, adults aged 40 years and older had the greatest increase, which was 51% between 2010 and 2015. So remember, this isn't just a young person's problem. It's something that we all need to be concerned about if we're being sexually active. Chlamydia is known as a silent infection because most infected people are asymptomatic and lack abnormal physical examination findings. Estimates of the proportion of people who are infected who actually go on to develop symptoms indicate only about 10% of men and 5 to 30% of women with lab-confirmed cases actually go on to develop symptoms. The incubation period is not fully defined, but it could be up to several weeks before folks actually start developing symptoms. In women, the bacteria initially infects your cervix, so that's what they check out when they do a Pap test. When the infection may actually cause signs and symptoms, which include discharge, swelling, and potentially bleeding. Sometimes your urethra or pier may also be infected and affected. It can cause pus, pain, increased urine frequency. The infection can also spread from the cervix to the upper respiratory tract, which is your uterus and your fallopian tubes. This causes pelvic inflammatory disease, which may be asymptomatic or acute, which means you show symptoms. And those symptoms can include pelvic pain, abdominal pain, and tenderness when people press on your tummy. Pelvic inflammatory disease can cause permanent damage to your fallopian tubes, uterus, and surrounding tissues. The damage can lead to chronic pelvic pain, infertility, and can lead to ectopic pregnancies. Men who are symptomatic typically have swelling in their urethra with mucoid or watery urethral discharge and pain when you pee. So, not fun times. A minority of men infected actually develop swelling in the testicular region. This may be with or without the pier problems, and it can be with presenting testicular pain, tenderness, and swelling as well. Chlamydia can infect the rectum in men and women, either directly through receptive anal sex or possibly spread from the cervix and vagina in women with cervical chlamydia infections. While these infections are often asymptomatic, they can actually cause things like swelling in your rectum, rectal pain, discharge, and/or bleeding. Sexually acquired chlamydial conjunctivitis. So your eyes can actually get infected with when they come in contact with infected genital secretions. So remember, when you go down below, you need to be careful because you can actually get chlamydia in your eye. While chlamydia can also be found in the throats of women and men having oral sex with an infected partner, it's typically asymptomatic. So gonorrhea. Gonorrhea is a sexually transmitted infection, and it's caused by the little bug Neisseria gonorrhea. It really infects the mucous membranes of the reproductive tract. So that includes your uterus, your cervix, your fallopian tubes, and your urethra. Gonorrhea can also infect the mucous membranes of your mouth, throat, eyes, and rectum. In 2015, we saw about 20,000 cases in Canada, and that was an increase of about 65% from 2010. Males consistently had higher rates than females did, and rates among adults 60 years and older increased faster than the rates among young people, although really the highest rates are those among 15 to 29 years of age. Many men with gonorrhea are asymptomatic. When it is present, though, there's urethral discharge, pain, the discharge is yellow or white or green, and it really typically appears 1 to 14 days after infection. In cases where there's urethral infection, it's typically complicated by swelling in the testicles, and they may complain of testicular or scrotal pain. Most women are also asymptomatic. When a woman has symptoms, they're often so mild and nonspecific that they're really mistaken for a bladder or just a general vaginal infection. The initial symptoms and signs in women include pain, increased vaginal discharge, and vaginal bleeding between periods. Women with gonorrhea are at risk of developing some pretty serious complications from the infections, regardless of if there is symptoms or how bad they are. Symptoms of rectal infection in both men and women may include discharge, anal itching, soreness, bleeding, and painful bowel movements. Rectal infection may be asymptomatic. Throat infections may cause a sore throat, but is typically asymptomatic. Untreated gonorrhea can cause serious and permanent health infections and problems in both men and women. It's really important to state that. In women, gonorrhea can spread upward, just like chlamydia, and cause pelvic inflammatory disease. The symptoms could be mild or they can be pretty severe. It can lead to internal abscesses and chronic pelvic pain. It's not good. So once again, it can cause infertility and increased risk of ectopic pregnancies. In gonorrhea, it can get more complicated for men because of the swelling of the scrotum. In rare cases, this swelling may actually lead to infertility. If left untreated, it can actually cause spread to the blood, and it can cause disseminated infections, which means it goes all over your body. So it's typically characterized by arthritis, problems with your skin, that sort of thing, and it can be very life-threatening. So how do you get an STI? You can get an STI by having vaginal, anal, or oral sex with someone who has an STI. Anyone who is sexually active can get an STI. It does not matter what age you are. It does not matter your orientation. It does not matter who your partner is. You could potentially get an STI. This is because some STIs, like herpes and HPV, are spread. Oh, sorry. Let's go back. How are STIs spread? You can get an STI by having vaginal, anal, or oral sex with someone who has an STI. Anyone who is sexually active can get an STI. You don't have to go all the way having anal or vaginal sex to get an STI. Some of these STIs are spread skin to skin. We learn about that you can get eye infections and, of course, throat infections as well with oral sex. So these are things to consider. STIs are pretty common, especially among young people. There are about 20 million cases of new STIs every single year in the United States. Half of these infections are in ages between 15 and 24. Younger people are at greater risk for several reasons. Young women's bodies are biologically more prone to STIs because we're all changing. Some young people do not get the recommended STI test, so they don't know they're having it. They haven't had those discussions and haven't been exposed to things. Many young people are hesitant to talk openly. They're scared to. They don't want to talk to their doctor or nurse about their sex lives. I think this is particularly important in Newfoundland and Labrador or small rural areas because the doctor probably knows your parents. They probably were the person that, helped your mom through her pregnancy and potentially helped during the birth. Not having transportation can make it more difficult for young people to have access to the STI testing. One of the barriers to testing could potentially be the need for anonymous testing, people being able to go get the testing and not have everyone and their dog see your name. That's one thing that prevents some young people from going. And one of the other things is more young people have more than one sex partner. I know that's a generalization and is not necessarily completely true. However, that it does increase your risk. So what is the surest way to protect yourself? Well, one of the things that you're going to hear a lot is, well, don't have sex. That means don't have vaginal, anal, or oral sex. So it's the full-on abstinence. The thing to keep in mind is we know that people have sex. The thing is, it's okay to say no. If you don't want to have sex, say no. Consent is important. Consent is everything. Now that we know that people like to have sex, and they like to have it a lot. If you decide to have sex, you and your partner should get tested for STIs beforehand. Make sure that you and your partner use a condom from start to finish every time you have oral, anal, or vaginal sex. Know where to get condoms. Know how to use them correctly. It is not safe to stop using condoms unless you've both been tested for STIs, know the results, and are in a mutually monogamous relationship. Mutually monogamous means you and your partner both agreed to only have sexual contact with each other. This can help protect against STIs as long as you've both been tested and know that you're STI free. Before you have sex, talk with your partner about how you'll prevent STIs and pregnancy. If you think you are ready to have sex, you need to be ready to prevent your body. You should also talk to your partner ahead of the time about what you will and will not do sexually. Your partner should always respect your right to say no to anything that does not feel right. Make sure you get the health care you need. Ask a doctor or a nurse or other healthcare professional about STI testing. Ask about vaccines that might prevent against HPV and hepatitis B. These are available to you. Try to avoid mixing alcohol and or recreational drugs with sex. If you use alcohol and drugs, you're more likely to take risk, like not using a condom or having sex with someone you wouldn't normally have sex with. Consent should always be clear and made in all circumstances. For those who may be sex workers, there are some fantastic resources to best protect yourself. Remember, you are not alone, and you deserve care and respect. So the question is, if I get an STI, how will I know? Well, many STIs don't cause any symptoms that you would notice. So the only way of knowing for sure is to get tested. You can get an STI from having sex with someone who has no symptoms. Just like you, that person might not even know that they have an STI. Where can I get tested? There are places that offer user-friendly and free tests. Your doctor or nurse or healthcare professional is someone you can talk to. If you feel like you can't talk to your family doctor, there are other options. In the St. John's metro region, there's a sexual health clinic at Mount Pearl Square. You can call them at 709-752-4882. And Planned Parenthood is a fantastic resource and can be reached at 1-877-NO-MYTHS. There are so many great organizations doing amazing things, like the Safe Harbor Outreach Project, or SHOP, the Tommy Sexton Center, the AIDS Committee in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the Safe Works Access Program, or SWAP, just to name a few. All of these groups are about supporting people who truly need it in a judgment-free space. If you are from somewhere else, make sure to reach out for this information. Most healthcare groups have websites and resources that can guide you in the correct and safe location and direction. So now that we've talked about all that, what can you do? Can STIs be treated? Doctors can prescribe medicine to cure some STIs, like chlamydia and gonorrhea. Other STIs, like herpes, can't be cured, but you can take medication to help you with the symptoms. If you're ever treated for an STI, be sure to finish all your medication. Even if you're feeling better, be sure to finish it. Ask the doctor or nurse about testing and treatment for your partner too. You and your partner should avoid having sex until you've both been treated. Otherwise, you might continue to pass the STI back and forth. It is possible to get an STI again after you've been treated, so just be sure to be aware of that. You might get it back. Well, what happens if you don't treat an STI? Well, we really talked about that. Some curable STIs can be very dangerous if we are treated. For example, if left untreated, chlamydia and gonorrhea can make it very difficult or even impossible to get pregnant in the future. You also increase your chances of getting HIV if you do have an untreated STI. And like some STIs, like HIV, can be fatal if left untreated. Well, then the question comes, what if my partner and I have an incurable STI? Some STIs, like herpes and HIV, aren't curable, but a doctor can prescribe medicine to treat it. If you are living with an STI, it's important to tell your partner before you have sex. Although it may be uncomfortable to talk about your STI, open and honest conversation can make your partner make informed decisions to protect their health. If I have questions, who can answer them? Well, if you have questions like anything else, talk to someone you trust, especially if you're a young person. A parent or a guardian may be the person for you to talk to. Maybe a trusted adult, maybe your partner. Just don't be afraid to have that open and honest conversation with them about your concerns. If you're ever confused or need advice, they may be the first place to start. It's also important to talk honestly with your doctor or nurse. Ask which STI test and vaccines they recommend for you. It can vary from person to person. Just remember, before you get your rocks off, it would be sweeter if you wrap your Peter. Back to you, John.
Greetings everyone, Oracle Betty here with our February 2019 Words of Wisdom for your consideration. Our word of consideration for the month of February, quite naturally, is love. And to quote Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? And in this case, love has everything to do with it. In exactly 2 weeks, some of us, or all of us, will celebrate Valentine's Day. And I say some of us because I do know some people, and I was one of those people when I was a teenager and I was single, who would blame Hallmark and would get all upset. Oh, this is just a Hallmark holiday and it's a way for single people to feel really, really bad. And in actual fact, it's not. If you're single on Valentine's Day, you don't have a specific love or lover that you want to spend the day with, guess what? The door is kind of opening for you to turn that love inward and love yourself some more. Words to consider. We've got other things to talk about too right now. So let's get into the Google definition of the word love. So Google defines love as an intense feeling of deep affection or a great interest and pleasure. How about to feel a deep romantic or sexual attachment or attraction to someone or something? However it's used, the word love can break down barriers, and for myself, it evokes feelings of warmth and visions of pink hearts floating out from my physical, and even though I'm laughing because I just feel this topic is so incredibly light and it has a high vibration. So I'm going to smile, and you're going to hear me smile and laugh when I talk about the pink hearts shooting out from my physical and etheric heart to your heart, to every heart. Everywhere in the world, anybody who needs love, I'm shooting it straight at them. And I overuse the word sometimes more than most. And again, I'm smiling. All right, I want you to consider now these words. Because of course, this whole topic, this whole 20 minutes or so is about words to consider. Consider the words of Kenneth Patchen. Love is playful, and love is noble, and ennobled. Oh, shattering gentleness, the sober sweet glee of its flowing wonder. Oh, love is playful and undesigning. Ah, wrath of it, wrath of a man's love, seeking its channel. And as I said earlier, I, for one, am really guilty of using the word love, sometimes over a lot, or if that's possible to say, over a lot. Because I'm constantly, I love my family, I love my home, I love our pets, I love my friends, I love my clients, I love my work, I love music, I love kirtan and bhajans, I love my artistic streak, I love how the universe is always taking care of us, I love how when we ask for something and we're really specific, the universe comes through for us. I could go on for days about how I use the word love and how the word love leads to gratitude. In my personal estimation, love and gratitude go hand in hand and create a really, really strong, very high vibration, which is widely available to this whole entire world and every living thing that is on it. There is a gentleman, Lee Harris. He is an energy intuitive. He says that love and grace are going to be huge in this next year of 2019. So, when we add grace to love and gratitude, wow. Wow. So grace, by definition, is simple elegance or refinement of movement or courteous goodwill. Do honor or credit to someone or something by one's presence. So in other words, you grace them with your presence. You grace your home with your presence. So, more to consider. Now we have love, gratitude, and grace. An even more powerful vibration. What does all of that mean for you? I personally feel that the vibration of love alone is very high. There is not much in this world that I can claim to like without loving. Now, there are things like maybe an employer. I really loved the employer, but I sometimes didn't like what they did, things that they did. But I'm just one of these who loves. Is love for you something that's reserved? Because some people are. The easiest way for me to describe it is hard nuts to crack. Okay, because there are people who have gone through a lot in their lives and cannot find that place where love is for some reason. However, it is in all of us, and it is available to all of us. And we have to learn the most important love there possibly is, or ever could be, is love of self. And that is not selfish. Okay, I veered off topic a little bit. We're going to come back to that. Because what I wanted to do was read some more to you when it comes to talking about, do you reserve your love, or are you the type who loves openly with wild abandon? Because that's I'm the redheaded child, that stubborn little child. I was the one, and that child is still alive and well. I take her out regularly. I was told a long time ago, we need to find our inner child and take that inner child out and have a little chat, have a little play to keep that inner child alive. And anyone who knows me knows that you will always hear the child in me. So what I want to read to you right now is from a book a friend gave me back in 1975. The book is called The Art of Happiness, and it's one of those little Hallmark books. It's lovely. This book is Friendship, Love, and Marriage. And this is what she wrote on the inside cover. The lesson lies in learning, and in teaching I'll be taught. There's nothing hidden anywhere. 'Tis all there to be sought. And she signed it underneath. And I just love the fact that I still have this book. But in this book, there is a section called Two Different Sorts of Love. So, and it's a little bit. So I just want to read for you. So it starts out, and of course, I'm going to tell you these are the selected writings of Andre Maurois. I just want to cover off. I don't like taking other people's work and claiming it as mine. So this is not my work. This is his or hers, whatever. Two different sorts of love. One day, when conversation turned on what really matters in life, Victor Hugo remarked that what he really valued was neither fame, fortune, nor genius, but loving and being loved. He was right. Nothing is worth having unless it can be shared with those who love us and love us wholeheartedly. And yet, their love adds nothing in itself unless we love them ourselves. Not that they need be many in number. I have often thought that one could be happy in the smallest town, even in some oasis in the Sahara, if only one had 2 or 3 real friends there. And this is where the oracle steps in and says, and I would say if they loved themselves more, if they loved their own company themselves, there would be no need to have another physical being with you. And contrawise, so I go back to the book again, and contrawise, I do not think that a head of state or leading figure in the arts can know real happiness unless there is one person beside him with whom he can remove his mask. And that could actually be himself, the oracle says. Back to the book. Hence, enormously important part that intimate friends, wives, or mistresses have played in the lives of great men. One feels so alone, a famous man around whom a little court revolved once told me. Love either of children, wife, or friends breaks the prison of loneliness. And the oracle adds to that, so does love of self. So, we'll go back to what type are you when it comes to love? Something to ponder. In this month of February, we have Valentine's Day, which is beautiful. And on Valentine's Day, quite a few people have birthdays. Our own Jonathan Mallard, who owns this podcast, has his birthday on January the 14th. So, sending out big kisses, big, big, big hearts to John on his birthday. And happy birthday, John. And let me say, thank you. I love you for letting me be a part of your podcast. I'm not finished talking about today's word yet, so I just wanted to put that in there so I wouldn't forget it. A very happy birthday, John, and thank you. I love you. I truly do. So, let's go back to, do I know what it feels like to be single? Yeah, I do, yeah. I know what it feels like to be single. Now, I haven't been single in, well, over 40 years, and I dearly love my husband. There are days I want to kill him, and I'm quite sure he wants to eliminate me or put duct tape around my mouth for want of something better, but we have a good marriage. But I was single, and I was one of those people who grumbled about me. Bah humbug. Hallmark just wants to do they just want to make money off Valentines. They just want us to buy this stuff. They just want to make people who are lonely feel even lonelier. Well, that might be the case. However, as I got older in life and saw the things I've seen, the places I've been, so some of the things I've seen have shown me the one person who we can rely on the most in this world is ourselves. Most of us do not even have a relationship with ourselves. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean anything physical. I mean, are you comfortable with your own company? Just you. Are you comfortable enough with yourself? Have you looked in the mirror? This is one I ask you now. Go find a mirror and look in that left eye. Because you're looking straight into your soul when you look in that eye. And you can tell yourself, I love you. See how that feels. Tell yourself again, I love you. How did that one feel? How about if you did it again? You know what? If once we love ourselves, you can, my favorite saying is I can be happy in a phone booth. You can literally be happy in a phone booth by yourself if we all but gave ourselves the love and the encouragement that we need. So much, there's so much under the heading of that word love. So very much. And you know, when you love, the more you love, the more you attract love. Infants, have you ever watched an infant? An infant knows their mom. The second they're born, the mother just has to, the breathing, for one. You know, that child has been listening to the mom's heart and breathing for 9 full months. That's one of the main things. But if mom just hummed, if for instance baby was in an incubator, the mom's hand on the child and a hum to let the child know they're connected, the love that child feels. Children are born of love. They know nothing else. We teach them the rest. Society teaches them the rest. Radio, television, internet, just the environment, everything around teaches them the rest. Our pets unconditionally love us. Parents unconditionally love their children. So, we've got the unconditional type and the conditional type. The conditional love has an end. It always has an end. But unconditional love does not have an end. It's unended. It's unendable. So think about it. Think about how you feel when you say the word love and where does it go? Where in you can you feel it when you say it? So, I've been talking a lot about that word and gratitude and grace, bringing it all together. So now, because it's February, because it's the middle of winter, it's cold, I'd like to do some reading for you. I really would. So this book I've got in my hand now is a book called Wings of Silver. Again, it was given to me probably by Shirley in 1975, around that era. All the writings are compiled by Joe Petty. This particular paragraph, I know I have heard this in churches at weddings. I know I have. Love suffers long and is kind. Love envies not. Love vaunts not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, thinks no evil, rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Love is the commandment for fulfilling all commandments, the rule for fulfilling all rules. Love works no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. We love ourselves, notwithstanding our faults. We ought to love our friends in the same manner. And the oracle says most of us don't even love ourselves. So, when a friend asks, there is no tomorrow. Love never reasons, but profusely gives. Gives like a thoughtless prodigal its all, and trembles then, lest it has done too little. Love knows no limit to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It can outlast anything. Love still stands when all else has fallen. Love which has ends will have an end. How shall I do to love? Believe. How shall I do to believe? Love. Love is the moral nature, what the sun is to earth. Love understands and love waits. Fall in love with yourself. I love this. And you have no rivals. How can you when you love yourself? And from another book, a book called Beautiful Thoughts, Robert Browning says, what's the earth with all its art, verse, music worth, compared with love found, gained, and kept? Charles Dickens says, a loving heart is the truest wisdom. Saint Teresa said, it is the nature of love to work in 1,000 different ways. William Penn said, love is the hardest lesson in Christianity, but for that reason, it should be most our care to learn it. And Heinrich Heine says, the sea has its pearls, the heaven its stars, but my heart has its love. And no, I'm not finished. Because I have these to add, because these are just beautiful. Goethe says we are shaped and fashioned by what we love. Samuel Jackson says, love is the wisdom of the fool and the folly of the wise. Habib Sahabib says, loving, my friend, is responsible for all the love in the world. And Goethe, that is the true season of love. When we believe that we alone can love, that no one could ever have loved so before us, and that no one will love in the same way after us. I just have to keep reading. These are beautiful. John Sheffield, all true love is grounded on esteem. Johann Richter, love one human being purely and warmly yourself, I said, and you will love all. The heart is in this heaven, like the sun in its course, sees nothing from the dewdrop to the ocean, but a mirror which it brightens and warms and fills. And you know what this book is called? I Think I Love You, so I bought you this book. I could read on and on, but I think I've given you lots of words of wisdom to consider for this month of February. Happy birthday, John Mallard, on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Stay warm. It is February. Love you all. Thanks for listening.
Attention all Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn radio listeners. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast brings you the best in East Coast esoterica on the first of every month. Together, we can keep it growing by sharing the show on social media, subscribing to the show wherever you may be listening to it from, and by leaving feedback about your favorite episodes. John certainly needs a friend like you to help make his dreams come true, minus the alien abduction dreams. That is not cool at all. The Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Always available, always free, always odd.
Welcome back to the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast, guys. Thanks so much once again for taking the time to download this show. Remember, the Odd to Newfoundland is your paranormal show, but it's also your monthly paranormal variety show. Tonight's guest is a PhD candidate at the Department of Folklore, Memorial University of Newfoundland, Canada. She also teaches 2 amazing classes there, and if you're lucky enough to be in her class and listen to this podcast right now, you be sure to give her some love and share this episode with your friends, by the way. She's been an instructor for close on 7 years there in the Folklore department. She even had me go to her class not too long ago, and I got to have a chat about ghosts with all her awesome students. Tonight, I have Cynthia Egan with me on the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast. Cindy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, John?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks so very much for taking the time once again to hang out with me. I know it's not easy. It takes a little bit of work.
Fair. Yes, fair is fair.
And I've invited you into my sacred space, which is my creepy little closet here on Canada Drive in St. John's, Newfoundland, where I do all my podcasts. And, it's a pretty sacred place. But from what me and you have discussed before, you're into some different kind of sacred places, ones that usually have to do with religion and folklore and whatnot around the world. What a beautiful topic to talk about today. Interesting places, really, all around the world that are sacred to people. And with that, I must say, how did you get into the M.U.N? What sparked your passion, so to speak, for folklore?
Well, I have a background in anthropology and religious studies, and I have a real passion for the folk, how people live their lives apart from the more elite aspects of our culture, like media and stuff like that. I'm interested in how we carry on our history and our traditions. That comes from my anthropology, and I got interested in studying sacred space and place, particularly when I lived in Ireland, and I spent time there doing a master's degree at Limerick University, and I would putter around the areas, and I would go and look at the standing stones and the various artifacts that they had from the past. And one of my favorite places to go was St. Bridget's Well outside of Liscannor in County Clare. And this is a little grotto dedicated to St. Bridget, and it sits just under a graveyard that's ancient and has several Celtic lords buried there, and it's a very ancient place. And I guess this well had been used for thousands of years. And so I would go there, and now it being the well to St. Bridget, you would go into this big, well, not big, I would say, built cavernous area. And when I walked in there the first time, I was struck by all the things that had been left as offerings to the well or to St. Bridget. There were mass cards, there were teddy bears, there were pictures of people, loved ones, there were rosaries, it was a real mix to me of a very ancient tradition of offerings at wells, very much Christianized. And I was fascinated with it. And I was really touched by the outpouring of need that you find in these spaces, these places that we make sacred through our behaviors and actions. And so this became a very sacred space for me. And every time I'd go by it, I'd stop and I'd I'd go in and, touch the water and look around and see the candles that had been burnt and the offerings, the outpouring from the people. So this is how I got into my love for folk and my love of studying religion, but how people really use religion in their lives daily. Not the elite dogma, but how people make meaning with their religious beliefs on a more folk level, of what we call as folklorists, vernacular.
I find too, like you mentioned right away, St. Bridget. Tell me a little tiny bit about that tradition, just a little tiny bit more. You mentioned offerings to St. Bridget in this well.
They aren't, I don't know if you would call them literal offerings, but that's what it struck me as. More they're remembrances or tokens. Now, maybe 1,000 years ago when it was the, goddess Bridget, who later became St. Bridget and who is the saint of Ireland along with St. Patrick. It may have been offerings, for supplicants to ask for prayers and healing. But now these are more memoriams to people who passed on. You would go and you would pray that St. Bridget would intercede and, heal your sick child or bless somebody who had passed on, And these are what these offerings are now. So it's a way of Christianizing something that was probably very ancient at the time. I mean, I'm sure the visitations to wells is a very, very ancient thing in Ireland. And in fact, place is almost as important spiritually to the Irish as much as edifices like churches and stuff like that. So sacred areas and places. So, and they would make these places sacred through their offerings. You can find it also like in Glastonbury where they have what the Scottish call clootie wells or cloth wells where they tie prayer cloths onto bushes. And these are places where people go and they tie their prayers, their needs, their wants, their desires onto these bushes. You can find it at the well in Glastonbury, England. They have the tithe, and you find them up in Scotland. You find sacred wells all over the British Isles and Ireland.
Really interesting stuff. I'm very fascinated by that. I'm sure there's more to you than just wells, though, Cindy. There are many, many sacred places. Yeah, like how. So from this well, so to speak, you drew upon this experience, and you've decided to research other sacred places. I mean, there's places in my mind right away. There's the most obvious ones, like. I think of the Great Pyramids of Giza, or I think of Stonehenge, or, even the Nazca Lines. Are there other places that you've visited or have researched thoroughly that you'd like to talk a little tiny bit about tonight?
Well, my interest really lies in grottos because of this grotto I visited at St. Bridget's Well. It was a grotto. A classic grotto is something that is a natural stone structure that, it has a powerful pull on people's stone. It's as early as 47,000 BCE, before the Common Era, that rock shelters were used as places of worship. So I'm interested in how people make place sacred and how, later my dissertation that I'm working on is on Marian Grotto, and particularly the two grottos here in Newfoundland at Flat Rock and Renews. And how these are replicas of Lourdes in France, where Saint Bernadette saw the Virgin Mary in 1858. She had 18 apparitions of the Virgin Mary there, and how this place has become sacred, and it's considered one of the first modern sacred spaces where you had trains and telegraph and everything that gave it much more impetus and spread around the world. And for many Catholics, they say this spread Mary's message around the world. But for 18 times Mary appeared to Bernadette, and this became a sacred space where healings take place. It's considered a healing grotto. And a lot of times people in small communities will build these grottos, these replicas of these sacred spaces in their own areas, because what this does is it centralizes the story of Mary and the story of Bernadette and the healing aspects of it in their own communities. So that's what I'm interested in.
Tell me a little tiny bit about, where you're to right now. I mean, I got the chance to go see it right in your own classroom, and how cool it was to be a part of, the folklore department at M.U.N. Tell me a little tiny bit about that passion.
My passion, for folklore, I mean, it's just magical. That's what I tell my students. When I teach Folklore 1000, the first thing I said is, welcome to the wonderful, magical world of folklore. Folklore is everywhere. It surrounds us. from knocking on wood to wearing that special rabbit's foot, when you're feeling, you need to feel lucky, to looking for four-leaf clovers. These are just all aspects of folklore. And these are what folk do. What I'm interested in is how people believe and how they express their beliefs through their own folklore, through vernacular belief. Not so much what the church tells them to believe or what society tells them to believe, but how they believe. So, this could be as simple as having your own altar where maybe if you're Catholic, you will have a statue of the Virgin or, Mary, but you'll also have crystals and you'll also have small tokens that mean something to you. Like here in my room, in my office, I have a medicine bag, a Native American medicine bag with things that were given to me, like tobacco ties. I have a candle of Our Lady of Guadalupe. These are all my particular ways of expressing my spirituality. So that's really where folklore comes in for me. I'm fascinated with what people do and what they believe. So, and folklore is a really magical thing to be studying. I mean, that class I was teaching was supernatural folklore. We looked at everything we talked about spiritualism in the 19th century. We went on talked about ghosts. We talked about zombies. We talked about traditional beliefs such as voodoo and Santeria. I mean, we talked about the supernatural, the unseen in our lives that make life meaningful for us. And so it was a really cool class, and that's why I had you come in and talk about what you do. So
it was so funny because, when I was a kid in high school, I was like, I have no interest in going to M.U.N because nothing interests me. And now I'd give anything to go back and take your class.
It's a great class. It's a great class. I have a lot of fun with it, and I have a lot of passion for it. And I teach Folklore 1000 as well, and that I have a lot of passion for that because we go through everything. We go through folklore and food, folklore and music, folklore and belief, superstitions. I talk about what we call vernacular belief or superstitions. We don't use that word so much anymore because it tends to be a little pejorative, meaning, oh, that's just superstition. But, we talk about vernacular belief. We talk about vernacular religion, which is what I study and what I'm writing about, how the folk use religion to make meaning in their lives. So it's just a really wonderful, wonderful topic, folklore. And of course, we talk about fairy. This is Newfoundland.
I know, which is going to be my next thing. You're talking about sacred spaces. And I mean, we've got songs, we've got stories, we've got the written word and painted pictures of the fairy folk here in Newfoundland. And, everybody's into it. Everybody's worried about it. What about you? What do you think of this whole fairy thing? Do you believe there's a fairy circle here in Newfoundland?
I did see a fairy circle up in, Conception Bay somewhere. There was a fairy circle. Living in Ireland, this is very much a part of their world as well. I'm not saying everybody in Ireland believes in the fairies, but this is where you get your tradition here in Newfoundland. It was brought over by the Irish. You find it predominantly along your more Irish areas. Funny enough, when you talk about like witchcraft and witches, you get that more in the Protestant areas. And the Catholic, there's this more of a leaning towards the traditions of fairy lore. And of course, that's the Irish. I have great stories concerning them. When I first I have stories from Ireland I could tell you about fairies, but I'll tell you about one I got here in Newfoundland.
Please do. This sounds great. And, here we go. Grab your wings, folks. It's about time you guys heard about Newfoundland fairies. Take it away.
Okay. When I got here to Newfoundland, I had, I think he was like, putting the telephone in. I think he was a telephone repairman or whatever, installer. And he came over and he was chatting. Oh, where are you from? I said, I'm from the States, blah, blah, blah. And we got talking and he goes, well, you know about the fairies. He says, when the fog comes in, the fairies come in on the fog. They come in with the fog. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, there's fairy paths around here that fairies, that this is the path they've always taken and they traverse this one area. And if you build on it, of course, the tradition is that the fairies are not going to be real happy with you. And so I did a little reading, and I was living in a house, and I won't say where this house was. It's in St. John's, and it is known to be along an area of a fairy path. So, of course, I'm intrigued because I'm a folklorist, and I thought it was great he was telling me these stories. So I remember one night I went to sleep, and this house I never felt comfortable in this house. This house always gave me the heebie-jeebies. So I remember going to bed one night, and I woke up the next morning, and my front door and back door were wide open. And, of course, it's blowing a gale outside. And I thought, well, okay, this is just, the storm did it. I'm paranoid, so I know I locked those doors, and I know I shut them. Now, one might have jagged open, and that you can explain by it, because both of them, the front door and the back door, were open. So, not more than a few days later, no breeze, no wind, it was cold. It was winter, but there was no gale going on like before. I went to bed, and I got up the next morning, and lo and behold, the front door and the back door were wide open again. So somebody told me this is the fairies going through the fairy path, and they went in the front door and out the back. So there's my Newfoundland fairy story, knock on wood.
Oh man, I'm so glad it was fairies and not one of those guys in that backhoe last week just trying to take your ATM.
Yeah, I'm so wealthy as a PhD student. I'm really wealthy. God, I wouldn't want them to rob me. So.
Tell me a little tiny bit about, some of the things in folklore from St. John's, like besides the fairies that kind of have interest you, piqued your curiosity. So you are from the States. I never actually asked you before what part of the States you're from.
I'm originally from Oregon, but I hail from Florida now. I've been living in Florida. Well, I had been living in Florida for some years before I came up here.
Gotcha.
So Tampa Bay, Florida.
Oh, there you go. Tell me a little tiny bit about what other parts of Newfoundland folklore interest you.
I'm interested in the maritime. I'm also interested in the maritime, the beliefs, the superstitions behind the vernacular beliefs. Sorry for any folklorists who are listening. The vernacular beliefs behind, lore behind sailing traditions and stuff like that. I find that fascinating. But I also find, a lot of, because I lived in Ireland for some years, I'm interested in the Irish connection with Newfoundland a lot, and the traditions that came over. In many ways, in the 1960s and 70s, when they started the folklore department at M.U.N, they saw Newfoundland as pretty pristine as far as culture was concerned, because to some degree it had been isolated from the mainland. I mean, you didn't join the Confederation until 49, so you had this kind of the pristine when it came to the music and the lore and the traditions and the stories, and particularly in connection with the Irish traditions. If you go down the loop, or up the loop, the Irish loop, you will get a lot of the accent from Ireland and stuff like that. And so I've always been fascinated with that. And they brought with them their Catholicism, their deep love of Virgin Mary, their deep love for St. Bridget, St. Anne. And it's been a powerful force in Newfoundland culture, this Irish Catholicism. So that's really where I am now, and I find it fascinating. And along with this, they brought a lot of their folklore and their stories and their traditions, which are familiar to me, having lived in Ireland for so many years. So,
one thing that my wife always talks about, I know this is going to be a little off topic, but not so much, is she talks about dimes, finding dimes. And apparently this is a sign from a past loved one that you're on the right track. Have you ever heard that one before?
No, I haven't. That's good, though.
Okay.
I'll have to file that in my vernacular belief file.
I think it used to be pennies, but we got rid of those.
Well, there is a belief, that pennies, and funny enough, you find a penny, pick it up all day long, you have good luck. There's the vernacular saying for that. And over in Ireland, if you find a penny, you pick it up, you spit on it, and you throw it over your left shoulder.
Oh, it's almost like the whole salt thing over the shoulder, If you spill the salt, you got to throw it over your shoulder. I'm sure you heard that one before, too.
Oh, that's very common. Salt was considered sacred at one time. It was worth your weight in salt. People were paid in salt. And you spill salt, you assault the gods. The other tradition behind that is you spill salt, you throw salt in the devil's eye by throwing it over your left shoulder. So there's lots of traditions that revolve around things like salt and pennies. Of course, pennies, you put a sacred metal in your pocket if you were going to walk around, and bread if you were going to be out on the moors or, the areas, the wild areas, to keep the fairies from taking you away.
Back on the subject of fairies we go.
Yeah.
We just can't stay away from it. We just can't stay away from it. I'm starting to think they're going to run away. Have you ever heard of I've heard, back on the subject of fairies, of course, you were from Florida. You know what most people's idea of a fairy is. The little thing but wand and wings and a little green dress and hangs out with Peter Pan, right? But these fairies are like, they'll run away with you here in Newfoundland. They'll come take you.
Yeah, you can go away with the fairies. The first, over in Ireland, it's to say, well, this is also the Irish tradition, that the fairies over there, you kind of placate them. They're the good people, the wee folk. You don't really talk about them, Lord bless us, knock on wood, because something will manifest or happen. And, and that's the same way in Ireland. They would leave milk and bread behind on their doorsteps when they went away to play or went to sleep to placate the fairies, because you didn't want them. They're tricksters, much like you have in Native American lore. You have, or Loki in Scandinavian lore, or Raven or Coyote in Native American lore. You have the fairy is very similar in that they are seen as tricksters. They will play tricks on you or they will take you away. And one of my favorite sayings out of Ireland is when you're talking to someone and they see somebody who's behaving strangely, he'll say, sure, he's away with fairies. So,
I love it.
That's a good one. I use that one now. He's away with the fairies.
I can't help but feel like most of this interview has been like a little Folklore 1000 introduction here between both of us. But I gotta ask you, since you're on the Odd to Newfoundland Paranormal podcast, have you ever had a paranormal experience yourself, Cindy?
Oh, sweet mother of God. Yes, I have. I've had numerous. I'm from a funny family. My grandmother read cards. She was a fortune teller, and she made money out of this. I guess she hung up her shingle, and this was back in, the 20s and 30s, and this was kind of the tail end of spiritualism. And you know what spiritualism, for your listeners, it was a period in the 19th century of mediumship and table rapping and seances and that kind of thing. It developed out of Hydesville, New York, when two young girls were able to speak to supposedly a ghost in their house. And this grew into a huge movement, and spiritualism was very popular. It was as popular as the internet is today. And it was kind of fading away in the 20s. And my grandmother was kind of the tail end of this, I believe. And so I have a kind of a cosmic family. And so, yes, I have had supernatural experiences. I'll tell you my one that I tell my students when we get on the topic of ghosts, or when I lecture on ghosts. I lived in an old house in Colorado Springs, Colorado, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. It used to be a old farmhouse, and it had other houses built up around it till it became more of a urbanized area. And I moved into that place, and it had one of those strange feelings. It was old, and a lot of these houses come with their own personalities. And I won't go into other things that happened there, but one day I had two basset hounds, two goofy looking basset hounds, and I had gotten up one morning and I sent them out to do their duty. And it was snowing outside, and I was going to make my coffee, and I walked over to the door to let them in, and I looked out, and the two of them were trotting in, just happy as can be, and right behind them was a little black terrier dog. I kid you not. And I thought, oh, somebody got into the yard. And I looked out there, and I looked around, and it had disappeared. And I thought, no, that's really strange. I said, there was a dog walking behind my other two dogs, coming in just like it had been called, like my other two dogs. And so I scratched my head and, later went out and looked at the fencing to see if anything had happened. And then when my husband came home, I said, I saw a dog trotting behind my two bassets when I called them in the morning. And he said, oh, no, you're crazy. And this is classic. When people say they have a ghost experience, the first thing people do is question their whether they're going, crazy.
I know all about that. I published a book on the topic.
Oh, it's very common. It's the first thing is, and of course people when they're telling their stories are always like, oh, you're not going to believe me, or, and they kind of wring their hands. But these are experiences people have. These are real experiences. So anyway, it was maybe 4 or 5 days later after I'd been poo-pooed that I was walking by the steps that led up to the bedroom in the house. And there walking up the steps was a little black dog. And as it walked up the steps, it disappeared.
Oh, no. Ah! You have a ghost dog. Creepy.
A ghost dog. That's the only apparition I've ever seen. Now, I've seen things move. I've experienced some real creepy experiences. And I remember when I was in the Navy as a young girl. And I was on a Navy base, and I was staying overnight, and I was given a barracks. I was in the barracks, and the barracks was very old. It was World War II. This is Myrtle Beach, North Carolina, the air base there for the Navy. And I was given I was stuck in the back of the bus, meaning I had the very back room, and it was in the older part of the barracks area, or the housing area, people, temporary housing. So I went in there, and that place made my hair stand up on the back of my. I felt somebody was watching me, and I just couldn't shake it. So when I finally went to bed, I left the light on because I was scared to death. I was 19 at the time, and I sat there and I kind of started to doze, and then I woke up and I noticed the glass I had sat next to me on the dresser moved, not just kind of moved a little bit, moved across the dresser, moved across it. And I sat straight up, and I did not sleep the rest of the night. So that's, little stuff like that. I've had experiences. My favorite is the dog.
Yeah, I think the dog. I think the dog scared me a bit more, but that's only because I love animals so much,
Yeah, but it was probably just some farm dog,
Yeah, man. And it might have been a residual haunting. You might have had a dog that used to do that all the time. So there you go.
Well, it seemed happy enough to come in with my other two dogs. Funny enough, my dog was named Happy and Phoebe. But,
nice.
Yeah. So it was happy to follow Happy. So it was that's one of the more interesting ones.
So to kind of tie this back to your area of expertise, so to speak, one of the things I write about in my own book was the recipes for hauntings, basically. Why a haunting might take place. People like to say that a building might be haunted because a horrible murder took place there, or something horrible happened. There's a lot of emotion tied to a place. But I also mentioned that monuments and places that just are important to people, or what you would call a sacred place, might also be where a haunting takes place. And that is very, very true. I kind of tie it back to what might be the reason for that. And in my mind, it might be people get tied to a place because they're emotionally tied to it, much like you were with that original grotto. You know what I mean? What do you think about that idea that, if there is such thing as ghosts out there, and I'll always say if there is such thing as ghosts out there, and these ghosts are attracted to one place, like a certain monument, something like that, how do you feel about that? Do you think it's possible?
Yes. Well, these are places of power. There is so much prayer and, what would you say, emotion being poured out in these sacred spaces, particularly places like these small grottos I'm looking at, or Lourdes in France. There's so much prayer and emotion being poured out in these places. Of course, it's going to be, I have some kind of residual energy around it. I can't help but think it would. One of the things I like about sacred spaces is, and I talked about this with my students, if you walk into a certain area or a place or a house or even a church or someplace, you have the sense or the feel, the sense of place is what we call it. Cultural geographers and folklorists and anthropologists, we call it the sense of place. There is a sense of it. You feel it. It's almost like you walk into a wall of feeling. So this, you could say, is that sacred place haunting. It doesn't have to be a human being. It can be a mass conglomeration of emotion from many human beings coming there. So, these places are all haunted, in quotation marks, with a sense of place, of feeling, of emotion. It's like you walk in some places and they feel very dark and scary. And then you walk in some places and they feel sacred. I've been in the mountains down in Arizona. They're called, funny enough, Superstition Mountains in Arizona. And the native peoples down there believe these are sacred. This is the place where the gods reside. And there was a real sense of place in parts of those mountains and where I hiked. So, it doesn't have to be haunted by a ghost. It can be haunted by the emotions of millennia people, offering themselves and their fears and their joys and their prayers to that space or to that deity who, resides in that space. So there are many forms of hauntings. John.
Believe it or not, our half hour is up. How quickly talking to you, like how just such an interesting person and just a beautiful person inside and out. I want to thank you so very much, Cindy, for coming on my show and letting my listeners actually listen to you. I think you're a wonderful speaker. I mean, my God, I'm not going to do any editing at all. This was great. We never even sneezed.
I just look at you. I just look at my talking to you like I'm talking to my students.
Well,
I just want to engage people in the lore that's around them. The folklore that's around them is rich. It's magical. It's wonderful.
I like looking at folklore. It's kind of what gives life meaning. And,
it does.
Yeah. And, I kind of laugh because I remember someone told me before, like, you should do a folklore podcast. I'm like, nah, man, I'm into the paranormal. And they laughed at me and said, oh my God, really? I said, well, yeah. And I was like, they were like, Johnny boy, like, come on. Folklore, paranormal, they're like pretty much married to each other.
Yeah. Well, folklore puts flesh on the bones of humanity.
Ooh, that's a nice quote. I like that.
No, that's my quote. Thank you.
Is there any way I can get my folklore cut down so I can lose a few pounds? So do you have any messages from your just vast knowledge you've pulled from folklore to share with my audience in closing here? Is there any message you'd like to let people know or anything you feel like they should, I like the idea that if you spend 10 minutes with somebody who's been doing something from 10 years, you're going to learn some really, really great stuff. Is there anything you want to impart?
The first thing I do in my class, the first paper they have to, I don't want to say paper they have to write, it's just five little paragraphs. I want you to go out and I want you to find folklore in your world. And you'd be surprised how much is around there, how much surrounds you. Go out, be a folklore detective, find the stories, find the songs, find the sayings, the little ditties, the little vernacular beliefs, superstition. Go out and find them, and you'll be surprised how rich your world is with the lore of humanity. It's magic.
Cindy, thanks so much for being a guest on the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast.
You're welcome. All the best.
Well, the time to say goodbye is upon us. But don't worry, you can keep track of the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast very easily. It's available on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, and TuneIn Radio. Just look for the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast banner. Of course, if you'd like to keep up to date, you can always check out the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast Facebook page, drop a like, and every single time a new show goes up, you'll be notified. You can also follow me, John Mallard, on Twitter at ODDTONFLD. That's Odd to Newfoundland. From the oldest city in North America, I bid you adieu from the Odd the Newfoundland Paranormal Podcast.